Hi, everyone. This is our first discussion post. So we had two articles this week, one about Seurat and one about Cézanne. I read both of them, and I want to discuss Cézanne and how it relates also to the Seurat article. So in the article about Cézanne and his work, it was titled Cézanne's Primitive Perspective or the View from Everywhere by Paul Smith. So I found this to be an article that I needed to spend a good amount of time reading just because the grammar and phrasing and vocab was definitely a little dense, but I think it had some really great points, and I learned a lot about Cézanne as an artist as well. So I felt that the primary thesis in like the first page, third paragraph, was acknowledging that Cézanne was also acknowledging both the allocentric and egocentric formats for compositional arrangement, with allocentric being more objective and concerning spatial relations and the unconscious, and egocentric being more subjective or the process of art making. So the whole entire article was really focusing on how Cézanne was only focused on painting something from one viewpoint, even though a lot of people who look at his work, because there's shifting perspectives, might think that there's multiple viewpoints. And he utilized a lot of different perspective systems in order to accomplish this. So there was the part of the article that I really also enjoyed is that Smith supported a lot of his arguments with direct quotes from Cézanne himself. And I thought this contributed really positively to my understanding about what Cézanne was really trying to accomplish, even outside of our like modern day art historical research, perspective. Just to know that all of these things that I was reading and, from, spoken the words of both Paul Smith himself as well as other art historians that he referenced, the main thing that to me supported everything that was being said was that Cézanne also confirmed all of this. And so even though other interpretations exist out there, this interpretation felt like something to me that was more on point with what Cézanne was actually trying to accomplish in his work. And so the main thesis also discussed how the virtual space works, and that even though Cézanne didn't move viewpoints while painting one image, he wanted to almost feel as if his paintings would be what they would look like if we were to. So doing a little research on my own, I also, just confirmed that Cézanne was a artist's precursor to Cubism and Fauvism, which is really interesting. Paul Smith also brought up Braque, who is someone who commits fully to Cubism and wants to work with the visual and tactile perception of space, while Cézanne wanted to use a more primitive aspect or a primitive approach that children's illustrations or pre-Renaissance artists did. He existed in a time when the modern city was growing very rapidly, and so in this space of a lot of social and just cultural changes were really, really kind of taking off. He wanted to return to a place in his artwork that felt more human. And so this entire concept was supported by a lot of different things. So the lived perspective concept was brought up, where, as a viewer, we're experiencing how objects unfold in our perceived sight. And of course, there's a lot of really intense intricacies to determining the space between ourselves and other objects in a three-dimensional space, but also in a two-dimensional space, which is what Cézanne was really focusing on. And so he needed to do a lot of almost artistic liberty kind of moments in order to make sure that he was conveying composition in the way that he wanted to. So sometimes there are shifting perspectives in his work, like a orange that feels very 3D sitting on a table, but the angle of the table doesn't match where we're approaching the painting from our own viewpoint. And Cézanne did this to try to include all of those different perspective aspects, but he was very firm in the fact that it was not that as he was painting, he would rotate around the objects. He stayed in one place the whole entire time. And so that's what makes him really unique from a lot of other artists. He Also, a couple of other things that were brought up in defense for this argument was that he also said he painted from a single viewpoint, which is like, that's kind of like, well, you can't argue with that. The artist himself said so. And he wanted to make a whole out of what can sometimes be fragmented. When we sit down to paint an image, certain aspects of different objects might be blocked or overlapped, or there might be conflicting lines in terms of the like technicalities of perspective. And Cézanne used his own artistic liberty to kind of make adjustments as needed, so that way the ending result conveyed a really three-dimensional understanding of the space without needing to rotate around an object. This lived perspective that Smith brings up mentions gains and losses in this process. I thought it was really interesting how the Seurat article was also focused on why the images in his work are really tied to social customs and social norms for his time period and the class that he lived in. Cézanne also was considering his own placement in society when making his own works and the development of, the modern city and the world. So I thought there was some really cool contrast there. In terms of like other art historical things, I really, I thought about artists who have really focused on accuracy of perspective and the world from where they're standing. Jan van Eyck and the Arnolfini portraits, one with that really intense accuracy to a convex mirror to where the people are placed. I think it's really interesting to make those connections between different artists in different time periods and how they treat the very like basic and simple concept of perspective or representing three-dimensional objects on a two-dimensional surface. There's a lot of different ways that artists go about this. I think the author of this article had an extremely compelling case. There was a lot of references to many different sources, both presented as a contrasting opinion and a similar one. And so I feel like they definitely had a very solid argument focusing on the Merleau-Ponty perspective. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. I think it's French. But I just thought it was really great how there's also other references to certain aspects, like Cézanne's lack of contours, showing the ability to include that lived perspective. Just looking at my notes. And so I really think that Cézanne's unique perspective is demonstrated in his work, which I now have a greater understanding for. The article was very interesting and effective. Like I said, a little wordy for my taste, but I think I really gained a better understanding about Cézanne and his work and what he was trying to accomplish, especially from the words from his mouth himself. In terms of modern art, it gives me more of an understanding as to what was happening prior to the firm adoption of the Cubist perspective. Cézanne is almost kind of like dipping his toe into those waters without committing fully, and that I think makes him really unique from the other Cubists that we are familiar with, like Braque and Picasso. Also going into Fauvism, Matisse is someone that I've always loved, and so I feel like his work is almost like the neon Technicolor version of Cézanne's work, but with a little bit more harsher line work. So I thought it was kind of cool to be able to witness the contrast between those two things and kind of have a better understanding for the development of early 20th century art. This was a great article. I enjoyed reading, and I can't wait to hear everyone else's thoughts. So thank you so much. Bye.